Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your presenter for today's webcast on service level metrics. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. And I want to thank BrightTalk for inviting MetricNet to speak on this topic today. This is our third webcast of 2020, and you may have noticed that we have adopted a new format for our webcasts this year. We're going to be delivering more webcasts, but they are going to be shorter in length. So instead of 60 minutes, we're going to be doing 30-minute webcasts this year in deference to those who are unable to spend a full hour on a webcast. Now, before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During today's presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. But if you have questions during the webcast, you will notice a questions button just below the image of my slides. During the webcast, you can click that button and type in your questions as the webcast progresses. I will wrap up my presentation a few minutes before the bottom of the hour to answer any questions that you have typed in during the webcast. Now, just by way of a quick introduction, MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of different industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the service desk, desktop support, and contact center benchmarks for MetricNet. Now, if you're interested, you can download today's presentation and the associated attachments. Just click that button there that says Attachments. You can also respond to our 3 polling questions during the webcast by clicking the Vote button. And we would ask you to rate our webcast and leave any feedback that you would like to when you exit the webcast today. Now, for those who are planning to attend Support World Live in August, assuming that it's not postponed, as many events have been, I would invite you to attend one or both of my sessions. I will be delivering a 2-day workshop on metrics at the beginning of the conference, and then presenting a session on employee engagement towards the end of the conference. Likewise, if you're going to CSAT, the CSAT conference in London in November, it's the premier event for IT service and support in Europe, I'll be doing a presentation on managing service and support as a business. Think internal profit center. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Today's agenda, we're going to cover 6 items. If you've been on our Metrics That Matter webcast series in the past, you'll recognize each one of these elements, and we like to start with a primer on metrics and the idea that metrics are the linchpin of success and continuous improvement for any contact center or technical support organization. We're going to review what's called the metrics hierarchy. There are 9 success factors involved in exploiting metrics for competitive advantage and continuous improvement for both contact centers and IT service and support organizations. We're going to define the service levels that we discussed today, including speed of answer, the percent of calls answered within a certain period of time, so X percent of calls answered within Y seconds, and call abandonment rate. We're also going to talk about why service levels are important and when they're important and the ideal service level areas. Typically, if your service levels are too aggressive, your costs go up. By contrast, if your service levels are not aggressive enough, you see a reduction in customer satisfaction. So we want to talk about where that appropriate range for service levels is. We're going to talk about the cause and effect relationships between some of the important KPIs, especially around service levels. And then I'm going to share some benchmarking data with you, which would include abandonment rate, percent of calls answered within a certain period of time, as well as speed of answer for both contact centers, inbound customer service contact centers, service desks, and then I'll share some mean time to resolve data with you for desktop support. So let's continue on to our first polling question. And what we're trying to do with this polling question is get a sense for who our audience is today and whether or not you work in a sales contact center, a service contact center, a technical support service desk, whether or not you're part of desktop support and field services, or some other organization. So if you wouldn't mind answering that polling question, that will give us some good data on who's on our call today. And by the way, the service levels that we talk about today are applicable, just as applicable in a contact center as they are in a technical support service desk. For desktop support and field services, typically we look at mean time to resolve as opposed to speed of answer or call abandonment rate. So if you wouldn't mind completing the first polling question, we'll get some good data here on who's in our audience, get a sense for whether or not you come from the contact center world or the tech support world, and if you're in the contact center world, whether or not you primarily focus on sales or service. So this gives us a little bit of background on who's on our call today. So we'll shut this poll down in just a couple of minutes, or I should say a few seconds. So if you haven't weighed in, please vote. And let me share these results with you. Okay, so of our audience here, we've got roughly 15% from sales contact centers. We've got just under 20%, actually 18%, working in service contact centers. So between sales and service contact centers, about a third of our audience, about 32%. So 14% for sales contact centers, 18% for service contact centers. Technical support service desks, about 40%. And then desktop field services, 3%, and then other, 22%. Other, these might be consultants, they might be industry analysts, for example, that don't actually work in a contact center or a service desk or desktop support, but we're happy to have them on our webcast here today. So roughly 40% technical support, another 32% for contact centers, 3% for desktop support and field services. Okay, so thank you for weighing in on that. It gives me a pretty good feel for what our audience looks like today. What we're going to do now is talk about the traditional paradigm for support, whether it's a contact center or a service desk. You've probably heard the expression people, process, and technology, and the idea here is that you invest first in your human resources, you recruit effectively, and you provide training, and you give those human resources the tools that they need to be successful on the job. Then you have processes in technical service and support. Those might be idle processes, although they don't necessarily have to be. In the contact center area, there are some standardized processes that are typically used. But what you want to have are repeatable processes that you can improve over time so that you show continuous improvement, not just in your performance, but also in the processes that drive that performance. And then the capstone of this paradigm is technology, an indication that technology is an important part of this paradigm. But people and process typically take precedence over technology. Technology is there to automate some of the key processes and eliminate repetitive errors. But one of the things we discovered a long time ago is that this paradigm by itself doesn't fully explain success in either the contact center or a technical support environment. And kind of the missing element of that paradigm was metrics. And you know, for every benchmark we do, and we do quite a few benchmarks for both contact centers as well as technical support organizations, both service desks and field service and desktop support organizations, typically the weakest area when you look at all the processes, the weakest area is typically metrics. Organizations might produce reports periodically, but they generally use metrics only for observational purposes, not for diagnostic and prescriptive purposes. But metrics really don't do you much good unless you're willing to exploit them diagnostically and prescriptively. And so what we have found is that those organizations that are good in people, process, and technology that also have a mature metrics discipline typically are able to achieve world-class performance. So we believe this is a more complete paradigm. This paradigm empirically reflects those organizations that are most successful, whether it be a contact center, inbound, outbound, sales, or service, whether it be a technical support organization, an in-source service desk, for example, or an outsourced service desk, or a desktop support organization. Having metrics as a foundational discipline is critical no matter how mature your people, your process, and technology are. So this is a more complete paradigm, and this isn't just me saying it because the name of my company is MetricNet. We have empirical data that shows this, and the empirical data shown here on page 11 of the presentation, there's more than 100 data points here. On the x-axis, we're showing the maturity of the metrics discipline ranging from 0, meaning no metrics whatsoever, all the way up to level 5, which says you're looking at the right metrics, you're tracking them, you're exploiting them diagnostically and prescriptively, you're continuously improving as a result of your metrics, and you've achieved world-class performance. That's what a 5 would be on this scale. Now the y-axis shows the service desk balance score. The balance score on a service desk can range from 0 to 100%. We have a webcast coming up on how that scorecard is created, but suffice it to say that the scorecard captures the metrics that are most important for either a contact center or a service desk or a desktop support organization. And you can clearly see the correlation here. That's what the green dashed line is. It represents the linear regression through the data points shown. And as the metrics mature, move to the right on the x-axis, the balanced score tends to improve. Now you'll see that there's a whole lot of data points between 0 and 1. There are fewer data points between 1 and 2 on the x-axis. Remember, this is maturity. Even fewer data points between 2 and 3, fewer between 3 and 4, and just a handful, maybe 7 or 8 between 4 and 5. So as you move to the right on the x-axis, the graph becomes sparser, meaning there are fewer and fewer organizations that have mature metrics. And that's another way of pointing out that this tends to be the weakest discipline for many contact centers, service desks, and desktop support organizations. They simply don't have mature metrics. And if you don't have mature metrics, you're never going to be able to use them diagnostically and prescriptively. But if you're down in the 4 to 5 range, that's exactly what these service desks and contact centers are doing, is that they are exploiting their metrics diagnostically and prescriptively to continuously improve their performance and ultimately achieve world-class performance. So this is the empirical evidence that supports the assertion I just made that metrics are a foundational discipline, just as important as people and process and technology. Now, when I move the slide forward, there's going to be a new polling question, and this polling question is meant to get a feel for how mature the metrics discipline is within your organization. And I just want to give you some instructions before I flip the page, because I don't want you to immediately answer the question or the polling question until you understand what it's asking. What we're trying to do is get at the level of maturity of your contact center or your service desk or your desktop support organization. And what I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to start at the top of the list. We use metrics to continuously improve. If that's true, click that. You can only answer once. If that's not true, move down to number 3. We understand KPI cause and effect. If that's not true, move down to number 2. We set performance targets for metrics. And if that's not true, move down to number 1. We can define our metrics. And if that's not true, you're going to go to the very bottom choice here. And so we're looking for some level of maturity. And start at the top. And like I said, if the 4th one, using metrics to continuously improve, if that's not true, move down to number 3, and keep moving down until you hit the one that represents your level of maturity, and click that answer. And that will give us a feel for how mature today's audience is. So a lot of you have voted already. Most of you have voted already. We'll leave this poll open for another few seconds because we'd like as many of you as possible to weigh in on this. Again, the attempt here, the desire here is to get a sense for how mature the metrics are for the audience on today's webcast. Okay, almost all of you have voted at this point, so we're going to shut this poll down in just a few seconds. If you haven't voted, go ahead and do so. Okay, now here are the answers. Number 4, we use metrics to continuously improve. Okay, about 30% of you are using metrics to continuously improve. That's really good. That's better than we would typically expect to see. Generally, in terms of continuous improvement, we might expect to see an answer somewhere in the range of 20%. But for today's audience, the answer is about 30% of you are using metrics to continuously improve. Okay, the next answer, we understand KPI cause and effect. Only about 5% of you understand the cause and effect relationships. By the way, we do have a slide a little bit later in today's presentation on KPI cause and effect. Moving further down, we set performance targets for metrics. 45% of you are doing that, which is good. We believe that except for handle time, we don't believe that it's appropriate to establish a performance target for handle time. But for every other metric that you track, we believe that if you're tracking the metric, you ought to have a target for the metric. 45% of you are establishing performance targets for your metrics. And then below that, we can define our metrics. 5% of you fall into that category, and then 11% fall into the category of not applicable or don't know. So this helps make the point that I was alluding to a little bit earlier, which is that many organizations are not using their metrics diagnostically and prescriptively. But this audience is surprisingly mature when it comes to metrics. Once again, roughly 30% of you are using your metrics to continuously improve. Only about 5% of you understand KPI cause and effect, or are at that level of maturity, and then 45% of you are at the level of maturity where you're setting performance targets. 5% of you are at the lowest level of maturity where you can define your metrics, but you're not doing anything beyond that. And then we have about 11% of you in the not applicable category. Okay, we're going to close this poll down, and I want to thank those of you who participated in this. Interesting information, and it helps us segue into our hierarchy for metrics, and there are 9 success factors when it comes to metrics. The first question is, do you even have metrics? 100% of those we work with have metrics, is what we found. Do you use metrics for reporting? About 90% of those we work with do use their metrics for reporting. Can you define your metrics? About 80% of those we work with can accurately define their metrics. The other 20% are tracking metrics that they don't even know how to define. They might include occupancy, they might include schedule adherence, they might include utilization. So not everyone knows how to define the metrics they're tracking. Now, setting performance targets with KPIs. About 60% of those that we work with across the industry are using KPIs or setting performance targets for their metrics. As I just mentioned, our belief is that if you're tracking a metric, you ought to have a performance target for it, the one exception being handle time. Generally, if you're setting a performance target for handle time, you're going to create bad behavior because you're either going to rush the agent or the analyst through the call, or they're going to spend too much time on the contact. We believe that that should be left to the judgment of the analyst or the agent. If they're hot on the trail of resolving an incident, let them stay on the call. By contrast, let them end a call 2 minutes into it. If they determine right away that they're not going to be able to resolve it, let them get it escalated as quickly as possible. Cause and effect relationships, only about 30% understand cause and effect. Only about 20% are using metrics diagnostically, 10% using metrics prescriptively. Continuous improvement, only about 10% of contact centers and technical support organizations are using their metrics for continuous improvement. And then finally, only about 5% of both contact centers and service desks worldwide achieve what would truly be considered world-class performance. The difficulty with this chart is that on the far right, you see that the value increases as you go up. So for example, establishing performance targets is more important than being able to define your KPIs. It gives you more value. Understanding cause and effect contributes more value than setting performance targets. So as you move up the hierarchy, each component, each best practice adds more value, yet there are fewer and fewer service desks, contact centers, and desktop support organizations that are practicing these industry best practices. And again, these nine levels on the hierarchy represent the success factors in maturing metrics. So this is a fairly important slide to internalize. Now, what we want to do at this point is switch gears and start talking about the metrics that really matter. And for purposes of the remainder of this webcast, we're going to be talking about service desk metrics, although at the end of the webcast, I'll be sharing some benchmarking data with you for contact center benchmarks as well as for desktop support benchmarks. Now here's a fairly common set. There's about 20 metrics on this page, fairly common set of metrics for the service desk. I don't want to lead you to believe that this is an all-inclusive set of metrics because there are literally hundreds of metrics when it comes to a service desk. The good news is there's an 80-20 rule when it comes to service desk metrics, and the ones that really matter are the ones that are highlighted on this page, and they happen to be the ones that end up in our balanced scorecard, and that would include your cost per contact or cost per ticket, customer satisfaction, first contact resolution rate, analyst or agent utilization, speed of answer, or some other service level metric, and then job satisfaction. Those are the metrics we include in the balanced scorecard, and you can manage either a contact center or a technical support organization very effectively by just tracking those metrics. So there is an 80-20 rule. 80-20 essentially is another way of saying that less is more. We get 80% of the value out of all of these metrics by tracking just 20% of the metrics. So you don't need to create a giant metrics bureaucracy in order to be effective when it comes to your metrics for the contact center or for technical support. What we're going to be focusing on going forward are service level metrics in particular, which would include your ASA. Technically, the only true service level metric here would be X% of calls answered within Y seconds. It might be, you've probably heard 80-20, so 80% of calls answered in 20 seconds, or you may have heard 80-60, 80% of calls answered in 60 seconds. But the generic service level metric is X% of calls answered in Y seconds. Call abandonment rate as well, closely related to that. So the only true service level here would be X% of calls answered within Y seconds. ASA and call abandonment rate are good proxies. They're very closely related to that true service level metric. And so cause and effect, this is something I spoke about earlier. We start with our foundation metrics of cost per unit of work. It might be cost per contact or cost per ticket, along with customer satisfaction. That's kind of the yin and yang of service and support organization. Cost is your measure of efficiency. Customer satisfaction is your measure of effectiveness. They're driven respectively by analyst or technician utilization and first contact resolution rate. Then we have our service levels in the green box. Your service levels do drive utilization. Aggressive service levels drive your utilization down and your costs up. Less aggressive service levels drive your utilization up and your costs down. And what this is meant to do is help you understand the dynamic nature of metrics and the fact that they are all interconnected. This is a dynamic linkage, and anytime one metric moves, they all move. But we're going to be focusing going forward on these service level metrics of ASA, abandonment rate, and percent of calls answered within a certain period of time. Now, pages 17 and 18 give you some definitions. I'm not going to read these for you, but we wanted to include them in this webcast so that for those of you who download the hard copy, the PDF of the slides, you have these definitions. Okay, let me show you some correlations. We're going to show you the relationship between speed of answer and cost per ticket on this particular page, and this is from a service desk. As you can see, the vast majority of service desks answer their calls. This would be for voice contacts in less than 100 seconds. That's what all those blue data points are to the left of 100 seconds on the x-axis. And as you go above 100 seconds, you can see that the data points thin out, but we do have some that go as high as 500 plus seconds. But you can see that as the ASA decreases, the cost per ticket goes up. That's not a surprise because generally you're going to have to staff up if you want to keep your ASA down. So the difference between having 10 versus 12 analysts on a service desk can increase your cost quite a bit, but it can also reduce your average speed of answer quite a bit. Now let's look at a regression of abandonment rate versus cost per ticket. The same thing holds true. Most of the abandonment rates are under 5%, but we've got some on here on the x-axis that go as high as 40%. The noticeable thing here, and again the green line is a linear regression through the data, is that as your abandonment rate goes down, your cost goes up. So keep that in mind. It's very important to remember that as you get more aggressive on your service levels, speed of answer, call abandonment rate, your costs go up. However, it doesn't do anything for your customer satisfaction. What I'm showing here on page 21, x-axis is your speed of answer divided by your handle time. So ASA is a percent of handle time. The y-axis represents your customer satisfaction. So ASA is a percent of handle time. Let's say that I've got a 10-minute handle time on a technical support service desk, and my ASA is 2 minutes. My ASA divided by handle time would be 20%. The reason we don't show seconds on the x-axis is because the seconds don't make that much difference. If you have a really quick, like 2-minute handle time on your service desk or in your contact center, the customer expects a much more aggressive ASA than they do if you have a 10 or a 20-minute handle time. What we have found is that there's strong correlation between ASA as a percent of handle time and customer satisfaction. And so what you can see here is that as long as your ASA divided by handle time is under maybe 25%, you're fine. You're not going to lose anything on customer satisfaction. However, if your ASA divided by handle time gets above 25-30%, you're going to see a drop-off in your customer satisfaction. So the implication between this and the prior slides is that there is a sweet spot when it comes to speed of answer. If you're down around 10%, your speed of answer is 10% of your handle time, or 5% or 1% of your handle time, you're going to spend a lot of money to get there, and you're not going to get anything in return on customer satisfaction. By contrast, if you're up around 40 or 50% of handle time for your speed of answer, you're going to see a drop-off in customer satisfaction. So the sweet spot here is right around 20 or 25%, meaning that your ASA is just fine if you're in the 20 to 25% range of your handle time. So think a 5-minute handle time, 25% of that would be 1 minute 15 seconds. Think 10-minute handle time, 20% of that or 25% of that would be 2.5 minutes. So be thinking 20 to 25% of handle time should be a pretty good target for your speed of answer. If you get more aggressive than that, you're going to see your costs go up. Same thing is true with abandonment rate. As long as you're under about 7% call abandonment rate, you're not going to lose anything on customer satisfaction. However, as you start to increase abandonment rate, especially above 8 or 10%, you're going to see a drop-off in customer satisfaction. So once again, it implies a sweet spot, meaning that keep your abandonment rate somewhere in the range of 5 to 8%. That way you don't get too expensive by having an aggressive service level, but you also don't see a drop-off in customer satisfaction by having an abandonment rate that's too high. Here what we've got for desktop support would be MTTR. Mean time to resolve means ticket close time minus ticket open time versus customer satisfaction on the y-axis. The customers of desktop support are very sensitive to MTTR. You can see that as the mean time to resolve, these are business hours, as the mean time to resolve goes down, customer satisfaction goes up. So we wanted to share some benchmarking data with you, and I'll share more benchmarking data with you in a few minutes here towards the end of the webcast. The whole goal of this is to ensure that you are keeping in front of you the importance, the primacy, if you will, of cost and quality. That is cost per contact or cost per ticket and customer satisfaction. If you get too aggressive on your service levels, your costs are going to go up. If you're not aggressive enough on your service levels, you're going to sacrifice customer satisfaction. So again, keep in mind the sweet spot. Where you want to end up on this particular chart is in the upper right quadrant. That is where you are both efficient, low cost, and effective. So x-axis represents cost, y-axis represents quality, upper right quadrant represents the quadrant where you are low cost, high quality, efficient, and effective. And the service levels play a key part in that, but you got to hit that sweet spot where your ASA is somewhere in the range of 20 to 25% of your handle time, and your abandonment rate is somewhere in the range of 8 to 10%. You don't want to get more aggressive than that, or your costs are going to go up. Let me share some benchmarking data with you from 2019. For the service desk, the average abandonment rate was 5.9%, but it ranged from 2.1% to 18%. The ASA averaged 97 seconds. That might sound like a really long ASA to a lot of you, but we've had service desks that are able to achieve a very high customer satisfaction even with an ASA of 97 seconds. The minimum is 14 seconds, the maximum almost 300 seconds, which is about 5 minutes. For the contact center, inbound customer service contact centers, the average abandonment rate, 7.5%, but it ranges from 2.4% to 25%. We have those two numbers sort of swapped there. So the low would be 2.4%, the high would be 25%. ASA ranges from 7 seconds to 151 seconds, and the average ASA is 52 seconds. And then when it comes to mean time to resolve, and this is clock hours, so ticket close time minus ticket open time, average is about 12 hours, but it ranges from 3 hours to 45.3 hours, and these would be incidents, not service requests. So there's some benchmarking data there for you to give you an idea of the ranges as well as the averages. Okay, I'm going to get to questions in just a moment, but before I do so, we have our final polling question of the day. For those who are interested, this polling question just gives you an opportunity to schedule a free consultation call with MetricNet. If you'd like a call back today or tomorrow, just click the top button. If it's not as urgent and you would prefer a call back next week, you can click that bottom button. Our webcasts are always free of charge. And if you like what you've heard today, I would encourage you to go to our website to sign up for our future webcasts. We'll be discussing contact handling metrics on the next webcast, and then quality metrics, agent metrics after that, and then we'll be going through the balanced scorecard after that. Now, if you're interested, you can download today's presentation, and there's some other attachments that are posted there. You can go to the attachments button and find today's presentation as well as some other collateral. And we would ask you at the conclusion of our webcast to give us an evaluation. Bright Talk takes those very seriously, and we do as well. We learn how to, we learn what we can do to better meet your needs when you give us an evaluation on our webcast. Okay, once again, for those that are planning to go to Support World Live in August, we've got a couple of events there, and we would invite you to attend that. And the SITS conference in London is going to be in November. I'll be presenting there as well. If you get a chance, please come and hear me present the business paradigm of IT service and support. So at this time, I'm going to open up the Q&A dialog box and answer any questions that you have typed in during the webcast. If you have any questions that you have not yet typed in, please do so now. So let me go ahead and look at the questions we've got. Okay, we got a number of questions that are typed in here. Again, if you haven't typed your question in, please do so now. Okay. First question is, why is it important to understand maturity when determining metrics? Well, the metrics you select are independent of the maturity of your metrics. You have to think of them as two separate things. Selecting the right metrics is a part of maturing your metrics. I spoke about the 80-20 rule very early on in this presentation. So the first thing to get right is the metrics that you should be tracking and trending. And then over time, you can mature those metrics. And simply what that means is that you improve the process of collecting the data for those metrics. You track those metrics over time. You begin to use those metrics diagnostically. You include them in your scorecard. And then you will see continuous improvement as a result of that. So one of the first steps is to establish the metrics you're going to track and trend over time. You can mature from there. Second question, we do not track ASA, so what would you recommend as a replacement for that metric on the balanced scorecard? I would pick another metric that is indicative of ASA. It could be abandonment rate, or it could be the percentage of calls answered within Y seconds, for example. But the service level metrics are primarily time-based. They're an indication of how quickly you respond to a customer. Next question, is it possible for our service levels to be too aggressive? Yes, that happens more often than not. There's a notion in this industry that quick service levels lead to high customer satisfaction, but really nothing could be further from the truth. Quick service levels are the best way to drive up your costs without gaining anything on customer satisfaction. But the opposite is also true, meaning that if your service levels are too weak, too lax, you will see a reduction in customer satisfaction. So yes, more often than not, what we find is that both contact centers and service desks oftentimes set their service levels too aggressive because they misinterpret them, assuming that aggressive service levels lead to high customer satisfaction. They don't. What customers care about is first contact resolution rate, and if you get to a high FCR, first contact resolution rate, even if your speed of answer is 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, your customer is going to cut you some slack there because they care more about competency than they do about speed. Okay, next question, should service levels vary by channel? So think about channels. You've got voice, you've got chat, you've got walk-up, you've got web submit, you've got email tickets, you've got sometimes voicemail, but that's very rare now. Should they vary by channel? The response time should not really vary by channel, and the resolution time sometimes varies a little bit by channel. But if you're trying to get your customers to adopt in the lower cost channels like chat, email submit, web submitted tickets, you need to ensure that you're as responsive in those non-voice channels as you are in the voice channel. So in general, you don't want to see service levels vary by channel. Otherwise, you're going to get a preponderance of voice contacts, and you're not going to be able to grow your alternative channels. All the alternative channels are lower cost than voice. So if you're trying to drive volume into chat, web, and email, you want to make sure your performance targets for service levels are just as aggressive in those alternative channels. Next question, you mentioned in last month's webcast setting a target for ASA based on % of handle time. What should that target be? I think that one slide answered the question. You should be in the range of 20 to 25% of your handle time for your ASA target. Next question, average speed of answer is a phone metric or inclusive of tickets via email, portal, etc. Well, on your email portal, you don't have the same thing as ASA because it's a non-live channel, but you do have an average response time. That's true of chat as well. So when it comes to email, web portal, chat, you should be tracking your average response time. And you want something that's nearly real time, because customers will not adopt those channels if they think that they're going to get better or quicker service in the voice line, and you're trying to direct customers away from voice because that's the most expensive channel. So you need near real-time responses in an email or web portal. Next question. Will the slide deck be available? The answer is yes. Click the button that says attachments and you can get the slide deck. Can you elaborate on the incident mean time to resolve in clock hours, specifically incidents, not tickets? Yes, the reason we do that is because service level MTTR is very different from incident MTTR. Service levels are generally planned work. Incidents are generally unplanned work. And your MTTR for incidents is more important than your MTTR for service requests. Your average service request fulfillment time is about 5 days. Your average incident mean time to resolve is about 12 hours. So we look at them separately. And what we don't want to do is commingle them, because if you're 20% service requests, 80% incidents versus another desktop support organization that's 80% service requests and 20% incidents, the MTTR for tickets doesn't make any sense. So we separate out MTTR for incidents, MTTR for tickets. You're looking for 3 to 5 days on your service requests and you're looking for 12 hours or less on your incidents, mean time to resolve. And again, that's clock hours, so ticket close time minus ticket open time. How do you measure satisfaction? Customer satisfaction, typically your ITSM system has a feature that allows you to send customer satisfaction surveys out via email. You can learn more about CSAT surveys by going to MetricNet's website. We have sample surveys you can download there, and we also have white papers that talk about what the customer satisfaction measures are. In addition to CSAT, there's NPS, which is Net Promoter Score. There's also Customer Reference Score. We've written white papers on all of those in case you're interested in learning about them. Next question, the maturity of the metric should be determined by the business itself or on a benchmarking basis. Generally, you're going to want to have a maturity assessment completed. MetricNet has one. We do it as part of every single benchmark. Businesses are generally not great at determining their own metrics maturity, oftentimes because they put emphasis on the wrong metrics and don't even count metrics that really count, or they put too much emphasis on metrics like service levels, as you know. Not terribly important. Your customers care a lot more about FCR than they do speed of answer, for example. So it's generally a good idea to have an outside organization that can do a metrics maturity assessment for you. Now, final question, how would you recommend getting customers to take the satisfaction survey? The numbers returned to us are low. I don't know how low they are, but you know the response rate for a CSAT survey in technical support is only 2.5 to 5%. You just don't get a lot of responses. That's the way it is. So the best way to get the highest response possible, it doesn't increase the percentage of response, but to get as many surveys back as you want to be surveying every customer. However, you should build a rule into the survey distribution that prevents you from surveying any given customer more than once every 3 months or once every 6 months. So you can expect low survey response, 2.5 to 5% is the industry norm. But if you're surveying on every ticket, again, assuming that you don't over-survey, don't do it more than once every 3 months for a given customer or once every 6 months for a given customer. Even at 2.5 to 5%, you can get a statistically valid sample of customer satisfaction responses. Okay, that was the final question. I want to thank all of you for attending today's webcast. I hope you found it to be informative and insightful, and I hope to see you on next month's webcast. Thank you so much. This concludes our webcast.